Freshly divorced and with nothing left to lose, Helen Marchand made a bold decision. She bought a mansion abandoned for decades. But what she discovered inside would shock her and change everything she thought she knew about her family. Hidden rooms, secret letters, and a mystery that connects her bloodline to a long-forgotten legacy. If you think moving into a haunted mansion is scary, wait until you see what Helen uncovered. Don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable true-life stories, and tell me in the comments, which state are you watching this from? The day Helen Marchand signed her divorce papers, she felt like the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. For 22 years, she had built her life around being a wife, a partner, and a steady presence in someone else's world. She had believed that love, patience, and loyalty were enough to hold the marriage together. But as she walked out of the courthouse with a thin envelope in her hands, she realized that sometimes even your best efforts are not enough to stop something from breaking. The divorce was not loud or dramatic. There were no screaming matches in public or cruel words spoken in front of strangers. It was quiet. That was what made it hurt more. The silence between her and her ex-husband had grown slowly over the years, like a wall being built brick by brick. By the time they finally admitted the truth, they were already living separate lives under the same roof. Helen did not only lose her marriage that day, she lost the house she had decorated with care. She lost the neighborhood where everyone knew her as part of a couple. She lost friends who quietly chose sides. Even family members did not know what to say to her anymore. Some looked at her with pity, others avoided her because they did not want to get involved. At 46, Helen felt invisible. She had spent most of her adult life supporting someone else's dreams while putting her own on hold. Now, standing alone in a small rented apartment, she wondered who she was without the title of wife. The rooms felt empty. The silence at night felt heavier than ever before. Money was tight after the settlement. She did not have the luxury to search for a perfect home. She just needed something affordable, something far away from the city that held too many memories. She wanted space. She wanted quiet. Most of all, she wanted to stop feeling like everyone was watching her rebuild from the ruins. One evening, while scrolling through property listings online, she saw it. An old mansion on the edge of a small town. The photos were dark and blurry. The garden was overgrown. The windows looked tired and dusty. The description was short and almost careless. It mentioned that the house had once been connected to criminal figures from the time of Al Capone, but it did not give many details. The price was shockingly low. Most people would have closed the page immediately. The place looked lonely, almost forgotten. But Helen felt something strange when she looked at those pictures. She did not see danger. She saw possibility. The mansion was not perfect, but neither was she. It was worn down, but still standing. A week later, she drove out to see it in person. The road leading to the property was narrow and quiet. Trees lined the path like silent guards. When the mansion finally came into view, it looked even bigger than the photos showed. The paint was peeling, and part of the porch leaned slightly to one side. Yet there was a strong presence about the house, as if it refused to fall apart completely. As she stepped inside, dust rose into the air. The floors creaked beneath her shoes. Sunlight pushed through cracked curtains, lighting up parts of the room while leaving other corners in shadow. It was not warm or welcoming, but it was honest. It did not pretend to be anything it wasn't. For the first time in months, Helen did not feel judged. The house did not care that her marriage had failed. It did not whisper about her mistakes. It simply stood there, waiting. The real estate agent warned her about the rumors. People in town believed the estate carried a dark history. Some said secret meetings had taken place there long ago. Others claimed the house had been abandoned for a reason.
Helen listened politely, but inside she felt calm. She realized something important in that moment. She had already survived heartbreak, loneliness, and public embarrassment. What else was there to fear? A house with old stories? She had her own scars. She understood what it meant to carry history. Standing in the center of the large, empty living room, she made a quiet decision. She was tired of running from her past. Maybe the only way forward was to step into something new, even if it looked broken at first. When she signed the papers for the mansion a few days later, it was not an act of bravery. It was an act of surrender. She had nothing left to lose, and sometimes that is the most powerful place to begin again.
From the first night Helen slept inside the mansion, she understood that this house was not just old, it was heavy with history. The air felt different, thicker somehow, as if the walls were holding secrets they were not ready to share. Every step she took across the wooden floors created a long echo that traveled down empty hallways. It reminded her that she was alone, but not completely alone. The past was still there. The locals had not been shy about sharing stories. When she stopped at the small grocery store in town, conversations would suddenly grow quiet. A few people stared at her with curiosity. An older woman finally approached her and asked, "You're the one who bought that estate, aren't you?" Helen nodded. The woman shook her head slowly and said, "That house has seen things." According to town rumors, the mansion once belonged to powerful men connected to underground crime during the Prohibition era. Some claimed secret gambling meetings were held there. Others said money and weapons were hidden inside the walls. A few believed that important figures tied to networks similar to those of Al Capone had visited the estate long ago. No one knew the full truth, but everyone agreed on one thing: the house carried a dark reputation. Helen tried not to let those stories affect her. She reminded herself that every old building has rumors. Small towns survive on gossip and imagination. Still, when night fell and wind moved through the trees outside, it was harder to ignore the feeling that the mansion had lived many lives before her. The second week after moving in, she began cleaning the main hallway. Dust covered almost every surface. As she wiped down the walls, she noticed faint marks where pictures once hung. Large rectangular shapes remained slightly cleaner than the surrounding paint. Someone had carefully removed every photograph before abandoning the house. That detail unsettled her more than any rumor. Why take the pictures and leave everything else behind? In the dining room, she found a long wooden table pushed against the wall. It was scratched and faded, but still strong. She imagined men in dark suits sitting there decades ago, speaking in low voices, making serious decisions. She shook the thought away. She did not want to turn imagination into fear. At night, the mansion seemed to wake up. Pipes knocked softly, floorboards shifted. Once she heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere upstairs. Her heart raced as she climbed the steps to check. Every room was empty. Windows were shut. Nothing had moved. She told herself it was just the house settling. Old buildings make sounds. That was normal. Yet something inside her felt unsettled. The weight of the house did not feel evil, but it felt unfinished, like a story paused in the middle. One afternoon, Helen decided to explore the attic. The narrow staircase creaked loudly as she climbed. Dust floated in the thin beams of light coming through a small window. Boxes were scattered around, some opened, some sealed shut with old tape. Most were empty, filled only with scraps of newspaper and broken glass. But in one corner, she found something different. A heavy trunk made of dark wood, locked with a rusted metal clasp. It looked older than everything else in the room. She ran her fingers over the surface and felt a strange connection she could not explain. It was as if the house was slowly revealing pieces of itself, but only when it decided she was ready. She did not open the trunk that day. Instead, she sat on the attic floor thinking about her own life.
She realized something important. Just like the mansion, she also carried a reputation now. Divorced, alone, starting over. People had formed opinions about her without knowing her full story. The house was the same. Everyone talked about its dark past, but no one truly knew what had happened inside those walls. For the first time, Helen wondered if the mansion's history was more complicated than the town believed. Maybe it was not only about crime or secrets. Maybe there were choices made for survival. Maybe there were sacrifices hidden behind the rumors. As days passed, Helen stopped feeling like a visitor. She began to feel like a quiet observer, learning the rhythm of the house. The fear slowly turned into curiosity. The whispers from town became background noise. Still, one truth remained clear. This was not an ordinary home. It carried memories that refused to disappear. And whether she liked it or not, Helen had stepped into a place where the past was not finished speaking.
A few weeks after moving into the mansion, Helen decided it was time to stop just cleaning and start repairing. The house needed real work if it was going to become livable. One afternoon, she focused on the long upstairs hallway where the wallpaper was peeling badly. She pulled at a loose corner and a large strip tore away easily, exposing the wall underneath. As she scraped off more layers, she noticed something strange. One section of the wall sounded hollow when she tapped on it. The rest felt solid and firm, but this part gave off a different echo. At first, she thought it was normal damage from age. Old houses often have weak spots. Still, something about the sound caught her attention. She pressed her ear lightly against the wall and knocked again. The hollow sound was clear. Her heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from curiosity. She went downstairs, grabbed a small hammer and screwdriver, and came back up. For a moment, she hesitated. Breaking into a wall felt dramatic, almost foolish. But this was her house now. She gently pushed the screwdriver into the soft area. The surface cracked more easily than expected. With a little effort, a small piece of plaster fell away. Dust filled the air. She coughed and waved it aside. Behind the broken plaster was empty space. Carefully, she widened the opening. Within minutes, a small hidden compartment appeared between the wooden beams. It was not large, but it was deep enough to store something valuable. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached inside. Her fingers touched paper. She slowly pulled out a bundle of envelopes tied together with faded string. The paper was yellow and fragile. Some of the ink had blurred with time, but the writing was still visible. Each envelope carried a name written in elegant handwriting. Helen sat down on the hallway floor, her back against the wall, and untied the string. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some were dated many decades ago. The language was formal and careful, almost coded. The letters mentioned meetings, financial arrangements, and protection of family interests. There were no direct confessions of crime, but the tone suggested secret dealings. As she continued sorting through the papers, something unexpected slipped out and fell onto her lap. It was an old black-and-white photograph. The image showed a group of men standing in front of the mansion. They wore dark suits and serious expressions. One man stood slightly apart from the others, his posture confident, almost commanding. Helen leaned closer. Behind the men, she could clearly see the same balcony railing that still existed outside her bedroom window. The photograph had been taken right here decades earlier. Then she noticed something else. In the corner of the photo, standing slightly behind the group, was a young woman. Her face was partially turned, but her features looked strangely familiar. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw. Helen felt a sudden chill run through her body. She had seen that face before. It looked almost identical to her grandmother's old photographs, the ones kept in a small album back in her childhood home. The resemblance was too strong to ignore. Confused, Helen searched deeper into the hidden space. Behind the letters and photographs, she found a small velvet pouch. Inside was a metal object, a mammally family crest ring. The symbol engraved on it made her breath catch. She had seen that symbol her entire life. Her grandmother used to wear a necklace with the same crest.
Helen always believed it was just a decorative design passed down through generations, but now, seeing it hidden inside the walls of this mansion, the meaning felt different. Why would her family's symbol be hidden inside a house connected to rumored gangsters? Why had no one ever mentioned any connection to this place? Her mind raced with questions. She remembered stories her grandmother used to tell about difficult times and choices made to survive, but those stories were always vague, never detailed. Helen had never thought to question them. Sitting there on the dusty hallway floor, surrounded by old letters and secrets, she felt something shift inside her. The mansion was no longer just an abandoned property with a dark reputation. It was connected to her personally. The discovery changed everything. She was not just uncovering history, she was uncovering her own. For the first time since her divorce, Helen forgot about her broken marriage. The pain of the past few years faded into the background. A new mystery stood in front of her, bigger than her heartbreak. She carefully gathered the letters and the ring, holding them close. The house had started to reveal its secrets, but it was clear this was only the beginning. And deep down, Helen knew one thing for certain. Whatever truth was hidden inside this mansion, it was also hidden inside her family.
The discovery inside the wall did not let Helen sleep that night. She placed the old letters, the photograph, and the family crest ring carefully on her bedside table. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of the young woman in the picture, the one who looked so much like her grandmother. The resemblance was too strong to be a coincidence. The next morning, Helen made a decision. Instead of guessing or imagining stories, she would search for real answers. The small town had a local archive office connected to the public library. It was not modern or fancy, but it stored old property records, newspapers, and family documents going back many decades. When she walked into the archive room, the smell of old paper filled the air. A middle-aged clerk greeted her politely. Helen explained that she had recently purchased the old estate on the edge of town and wanted to learn more about its history. The clerk raised his eyebrows slightly, but said nothing. After a few minutes, he brought out large record books and boxes filled with newspapers. Helen spent hours turning fragile pages. She found articles about business deals, land purchases, and social events held at the mansion many years ago. The estate had once belonged to a man known for his wealth and influence. Officially, he was described as an investor and businessman. Unofficially, rumors connected him to underground operations during Prohibition. But then she saw a name that made her hands freeze. The original owner's last name matched her grandmother's maiden name. Her heart began to beat loudly in her chest. She flipped through more pages, searching carefully. In an old society column, she found a small mention of a family gathering at the estate. Listed among the guests was a young woman with the same name as her grandmother, years before her grandmother had supposedly moved to another city and started fresh. The story her family had always told her was simple. Her grandmother had come from a poor background and built a new life through hard work. There had never been any mention of wealth, influence, or connection to a powerful estate. Confused and overwhelmed, Helen requested access to birth and marriage records. After some searching, she confirmed something shocking. Her grandmother was not just a distant relative of the estate's owner. She was his daughter. Helen leaned back in her chair, trying to breathe slowly. That meant the mansion had once belonged to her own bloodline. The letters hidden inside the wall were not random documents. They were part of her family's history. Why had no one ever told her? As she continued reading, another detail stood out. Years after the height of the estate's power, there was a sudden disappearance of the family name from town records. The property had changed ownership quietly. The daughter, her grandmother, had relocated and legally changed part of her name. It was not just a move, it was an intentional break. Helen remembered how her grandmother rarely spoke about her childhood. Whenever Helen asked questions, she would smile softly and say, "Some chapters are better left closed."
At the time, it sounded poetic. Now it felt like a warning. The deeper Helen looked, the clearer the picture became. Her grandmother grew up surrounded by wealth and dangerous connections. When authorities began investigating illegal operations linked to powerful figures of that era, many families were forced to protect themselves. Some faced prison, others vanished from public life. It appeared that her grandmother had chosen a different path. Instead of staying loyal to the empire built around her, she walked away. She cut ties, changed her name, and built a quiet life far from the mansion and its secrets. Helen felt a mix of emotions: shock, confusion, even anger. Why had her grandmother hidden such a big truth? Did the rest of the family know, or had the secret been buried completely? But alongside those questions came something else: understanding. Maybe her grandmother had not hidden the truth out of shame. Maybe she had done it to protect future generations, to protect Helen. Sitting in the quiet archive room, Helen realized that her identity was more complex than she had ever imagined. She had always believed she came from simple, ordinary roots. Now she understood that her family history included power, danger, and sacrifice. The mansion was no longer just a strange purchase after a painful divorce. It was part of her story, a chapter that had been erased. As she gathered copies of the records and prepared to leave, one thought stayed in her mind. Her grandmother had walked away from this legacy once before, but now, years later, Helen had unknowingly walked back into it. The question was no longer whether she was connected to the estate. The question was why fate had brought her back. After discovering the truth about her grandmother in the town archives, Helen returned to the mansion with a different feeling in her heart. The house no longer felt like a random escape after her divorce. It felt personal. It felt connected to her blood. Every wall, every hallway, every old wooden step now seemed to carry a deeper meaning. For days, she kept thinking about the letters she had found hidden inside the wall. If those were placed there carefully, maybe there were more secrets still waiting. The mansion was large, and she had only explored small parts of it. Something inside her told her the house was not finished revealing its story. One afternoon, while cleaning the basement, she noticed something unusual about the floor. The tiles near the back wall looked slightly newer than the others. They were still old, but the pattern did not match perfectly. Most people would never notice the difference, but Helen had been paying attention to every detail since her discoveries. She knelt down and tapped on the tile with a small tool. The sound was different, hollow, just like the wall upstairs had been. Her heart started beating faster again. She carefully removed one tile, then another. Underneath, she found a small metal handle hidden beneath dust and dirt. It was a door. Her hands shook as she pulled on the handle. At first, it did not move. She pulled harder. With a loud creaking sound, a square section of the floor lifted open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into darkness. For a moment, fear tried to stop her. The space looked cold and untouched, but curiosity was stronger. She grabbed a flashlight and slowly stepped down. The air felt damp and cool, like it had not been disturbed for decades. At the bottom of the stairs was a small underground room. It was not large, but it was carefully built. Wooden shelves lined one wall. A desk stood in the corner, covered in dust. In the center of the room was a heavy metal safe attached to the concrete floor. Helen's breathing became slow and careful. This was not just a storage space. It was hidden on purpose. She walked toward the desk first. On top of it lay several old journals stacked neatly together. The leather covers were cracked with age, but they were still strong. She gently opened the first one. The writing inside was neat and organized. It was not emotional or dramatic. It was detailed. Pages were filled with notes about business meetings, financial records, and coded entries.
Some pages mentioned investments and protection agreements. Others spoke about protecting future generations and securing a clean legacy. As she read more, she realized something surprising. The journals did not describe violence or cruelty. Instead, they showed strategy and planning. Yes, there were signs of illegal activity connected to that time period, but there were also signs of change. In later entries, the writer spoke about stepping away from dangerous alliances and dissolving certain operations. One entry made her pause completely. It mentioned a daughter who believed the family deserved a second chance. It described her as strong, determined, and unwilling to continue the cycle of crime. The writer seemed proud of her courage. Helen felt tears rise in her eyes. That daughter had to be her grandmother. Her grandmother had not simply run away, she had helped end something. With shaking hands, Helen turned her attention to the safe. It was old and heavy, but the lock was mechanical. After several attempts and careful adjustments, she managed to open it. Inside were bundles of old cash, jewelry wrapped in cloth, and several sealed envelopes. At the very bottom was a smaller box. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a document transferring ownership rights to hidden financial assets to a family member, the daughter who had chosen to leave. The document was never claimed. Helen sat back on the cold basement floor, overwhelmed. Her grandmother had been given a choice: continue the empire or walk away. She had chosen to walk away, leaving wealth and power behind to protect her future family. That meant Helen's life, her simple childhood, her ordinary upbringing, had not been an accident. It had been a decision made out of love and sacrifice. The mansion was not just a symbol of crime, it was a symbol of transformation. As she looked around the hidden room, Helen understood something deeply important. Her family's legacy was not only about mistakes or dark history, it was also about courage, the courage to stop, to change, and to start over. For the first time since her divorce, Helen did not feel broken. She felt strong. The pain of losing her marriage no longer defined her. She came from a line of people who had faced difficult choices and survived. Standing up in the hidden chamber, Helen realized the greatest inheritance left to her was not money or property, it was the power to choose a different path. After discovering the hidden chamber and the journals in the basement, Helen thought she had finally uncovered all the mansion's secrets. She felt a strange mix of awe and relief, as if the house had finally started trusting her. For a few days, she worked quietly, organizing the papers she had found, cataloging the letters, and making notes about the family history she was uncovering. The mansion no longer felt just like a place to hide from her past. It felt alive, as if it were slowly sharing its story with her. But the peace was short-lived. Strange things began to happen almost immediately after her discoveries. At first, they were small. Her mailbox was slightly ajar one morning, though she had locked it the night before. Letters and envelopes had been moved, but nothing important was missing. She told herself it was probably the wind or a careless delivery person. Then the electricity in the mansion began to flicker. Lights went off at odd times, often in the middle of the night. Sometimes the circuits clicked and hummed as though struggling to stay on. The house had old wiring, she reminded herself, but deep down she felt uneasy. One night, while she was in the living room reading the journals, she heard the unmistakable sound of a car stopping outside. The headlights were off, leaving the driveway dark. She froze. Who would be visiting at this hour, and why would they hide their presence? Helen approached the window cautiously. The shape of a large vehicle could be seen faintly through the trees. It stayed there for a long time before moving again, slowly disappearing into the shadows. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Someone had come to see the mansion, or perhaps to see her. The next morning, she found footprints near the side gate. They were fresh, yet there was no note or communication.
Helen realized she could not ignore what was happening. This was no longer a quiet investigation into her family history. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew about the mansion, or at least about the secrets it contained. Over the next few days, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Doors that she had locked would sometimes be slightly ajar. Objects she had placed in one location were moved elsewhere. Even her dog, a small and usually calm terrier, grew restless and barked at shadows Helen could not see. Helen began documenting everything. She took photos of footprints, noted times of strange occurrences, and even started keeping a journal about the odd experiences. She knew she had to remain calm and logical, but her mind could not stop thinking of the possibilities. Could someone from the past family line have learned about the hidden chamber? Or could it be thieves looking for valuables rumored to be in the house? Despite the fear, Helen refused to leave. The mansion had become too important. This was not just about money or history anymore. It was about understanding her roots and reclaiming a part of herself she had never known existed. One night, determined not to be intimidated, she sat in the living room with the lights on, the journals spread out before her, and a flashlight ready. She went through each entry, looking for clues about anyone who might have a claim to the property or knowledge of the hidden items. Some of the journal entries hinted that previous owners had kept the treasures and documents secret to protect the family from external threats. Could those threats still exist even decades later? Helen realized she had to be careful. The mansion's past was not just a story in books. It had left a mark on the present. Whether it was the descendants of the original family, people still interested in the estate's secrets, or just the lingering energy of a place with a dark history, she could not take risks. She needed to protect herself, the mansion, and the truth she had uncovered. But Helen also felt a strange exhilaration. Despite the fear, there was power in knowing the secrets of the house. She had stepped into a world few people had ever seen, and it was testing her courage. Every strange sound, every shadow outside the window reminded her that the past could not be ignored. By the end of the week, Helen accepted that the mansion was alive in a way she had never imagined. Its history was reaching out to the present, testing her resolution and forcing her to face not only the secrets hidden in the walls, but also her own fears. The mansion had become more than just a place to escape. It was a challenge, a teacher, and a mirror reflecting the courage and determination she needed to embrace her family's past and protect the truth she had uncovered. And deep down, Helen knew that this experience was more than just danger. It was about transformation, preparing her for the revelations and choices that were still to come.
After weeks of living in the mansion, uncovering hidden letters, journals, and family secrets, Helen began to feel a responsibility she had never expected. What had started as an escape from her painful divorce had grown into something much bigger. The estate was no longer just a building filled with shadows and dust. It had become a living record of her family's past, and she realized she could not keep what she had discovered to herself. She spent days organizing the journals and letters she had found. Each page told a story not only of wealth and power, but also of difficult choices and sacrifices. Her grandmother had chosen to leave the mansion and step away from the family's influence to protect future generations. Helen began to see the courage it must have taken to make that decision. She understood that the secret was not something to hide out of shame, but something to honor for the lessons it offered. Helen decided that the estate and its story should be shared in the right way. She reached out to a local historian who specialized in the town's history. The historian was initially skeptical, but when Helen showed him the journals and the letters, he became fascinated. Together, they began piecing together a timeline of events, cross-referencing the estate's records with public documents and old newspapers. Each discovery brought new insights, and Helen felt more connected to her family and to the mansion itself. Working on the history project also gave Helen a sense of purpose she had not felt since her divorce. Instead of focusing on her pain and the mistakes of the past, she was now contributing to something meaningful. She carefully documented the secrets she had uncovered, distinguishing between legend and fact. She wanted the truth to be told, not exaggerated, not sensationalized, but clear and honest. The historian suggested publishing a story about the estate, including its connection to Helen's family. It would highlight not only the past's darker elements, but also the bravery and wisdom that allowed the family to survive and protect future generations. Helen was hesitant at first. She had never sought attention or recognition, and she worried about how the public might react. But she realized that this was bigger than her comfort. It was about preserving the integrity of the history and honoring the choices her grandmother had made. As the project progressed, Helen also began restoring the mansion itself. She repaired broken windows, cleaned dusty rooms, and gradually brought life back into the estate. Each improvement felt symbolic. The house had survived decades of neglect, just as her family had survived the difficult choices of the past. By restoring it, she was preserving both the physical space and the legacy it represented. During this process, Helen discovered another layer of the story. Some distant relatives had heard rumors about the estate and had been quietly following her discoveries. Rather than conflict, she found cooperation. They shared memories and stories that filled in gaps, adding depth and context to the journals she had uncovered. The mansion had become a point of connection, bridging the past and present, and reminding Helen that family could take many forms beyond blood alone. Through documenting the estate and restoring its walls, Helen experienced a transformation within herself. She realized that she no longer felt like a victim of her past. The divorce that once seemed like the end of everything had led her to a deeper understanding of herself and her roots. She now understood that her life was shaped not only by what she had lost, but by the courage and choices of those who came before her. By the time the historian's work was ready to be published, Helen had changed. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more grounded. She had taken the mansion, a place filled with rumors, mystery, and history, and turned it into a site of truth and legacy. The story they published was not sensational, it was meaningful, highlighting the sacrifices, intelligence, and bravery of her grandmother and other family members. Helen's work on the estate taught her a powerful lesson. The past cannot be erased, but it can be understood, honored, and transformed into something that gives life meaning. The mansion no longer haunted her. It had guided her, challenged her, and ultimately helped her reclaim a sense of identity and purpose she thought she had lost. In restoring the estate and sharing its story, Helen had reclaimed not just a home, but a part of herself that had been waiting to be discovered all along. After months of uncovering hidden secrets, documenting the estate's history, and restoring the mansion, Helen finally felt a sense of closure she hadn't experienced in years. What had started as an attempt to escape her painful divorce had grown into a journey that transformed her life completely. The mansion, once dark, decaying, and full of whispers, now stood as a symbol of truth, courage, and personal growth. The final stage of Helen's journey was not about uncovering more secrets, but about understanding what she had learned and how it had changed her. Sitting in the sunlight streaming through the clean, repaired windows, she reflected on everything she had discovered. She realized that the mansion had given her more than a shelter. It had given her perspective. It showed her that her past, her family history, and even her mistakes were part of a larger story that she could now embrace rather than fear. Helen's grandmother had made difficult choices to protect future generations, leaving behind clues that Helen could now piece together. Understanding this helped Helen forgive not only her family for their secrecy, but also herself for feeling broken after her divorce. She recognized that life does not always go according to plan, but the strength to start over comes from within. The mansion had also become a bridge between Helen's personal healing and a larger purpose. She decided to share the story she had uncovered, not as a sensational tale of crime and secrecy, but as a lesson in resilience, sacrifice, and the power of choices. She worked with the historian and distant relatives to create a detailed account of the estate and her family's journey. The story highlighted courage in the face of danger, the wisdom of walking away from harmful cycles, and the value of preserving truth. Through sharing the mansion's history, Helen discovered that her pain could be transformed into purpose. People who read the story were inspired by her courage and the lessons embedded in her family's past. The estate became a historical site for the town, visited by people who wanted to learn not only about the past crimes and mysteries, but also about the human decisions that shaped the family's legacy. Helen took pride in knowing that her journey had helped others understand the importance of integrity and resilience. Helen also found personal peace in restoring the mansion itself. Each repaired window, polished floorboard, and cleared room was a small victory. The house had once been abandoned and forgotten, just like Helen had felt after her divorce. By breathing life back into the mansion, she was also restoring her own sense of identity and strength. Every time she walked through the halls, she could feel the connection to her grandmother and the generations before her. The mansion was no longer a place of fear, it was a place of empowerment. Her relationships with her family also changed. By uncovering and honoring the past, she strengthened bonds with distant relatives she had never known. They shared memories, photographs, and insights that completed the story of their shared history. Helen realized that family is more than just bloodlines. It is the connections we nurture, the truths we uncover, and the choices we honor. By the end of her journey, Helen understood that her divorce, which had once seemed like the end of her world, had been the beginning of something far greater. It had pushed her to find a place where she could confront history, embrace her heritage, and reclaim her own life. The mansion, with its hidden rooms, journals, and secrets, had guided her to a new understanding of herself. Helen walked through the restored halls one final time, feeling a sense of calm she had never known. She had faced fear, curiosity, and uncertainty. She had confronted family secrets and the weight of the past, and through it all, she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. She realized that life is not just about avoiding pain, but about using challenges to grow, to discover hidden strengths, and to build a future with purpose. As Helen stepped out onto the veranda, looking at the garden slowly coming back to life, she felt a deep sense of freedom. The mansion had given her a second chance, a chance to live fully, to honor the past, and to create meaning from her experiences. She had moved into the estate feeling lost and broken, but she was leaving it empowered, connected, and transformed. The mansion, once a forgotten relic, had become the foundation of a new beginning. Helen knew one truth above all. Sometimes the places we run to for safety are the very places that help us discover who we are and who we can become. The mansion had not only revealed secrets of the past, it had revealed her own strength, courage, and the possibility of a life rebuilt from the ruins.